We're just swimming in numbers, charts, and headlines all day long, right? But how do you know what to actually trust? Well, today, we're going to build a kind of toolkit for statistical self-defense. It's all about learning how to cut through the noise and find what's really going on. And this quote from Nate Silver, man, it just nails it. Numbers on their own, they're kind of meaningless. We're the ones who give them a voice. We wrap them up in a story. But the real question is, are we always telling the right story? I mean, think about this headline from back in 2015. The World Health Organization basically put processed meat in the same uh-oh category as asbestos and tobacco. And people freaked out. Suddenly, headlines were everywhere, making it sound like your bacon sandwich was pretty much as bad as a cigarette.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting. It's all about the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. That 18% increase, that's the relative risk. And yeah, it sounds terrifying, but what does it actually mean for you and me in the real world? Well, the absolute risk tells us that if 100 people ate bacon every single day of their lives, we'd only expect one extra case of bowel cancer. Puts it in a whole different light, doesn't it?
Right, so that whole bacon scare is a perfect example of how numbers can be framed to, well, totally mislead us. So let's pull back the curtain a bit and unmask some of the most common statistical traps out there. Okay, check this one out. It's a headline that really got people talking over in the UK. And you can see why, right? The story is so simple and tempting. A fancy supermarket opens up nearby, and bam, your house is suddenly worth thousands more. It just feels like a simple cause and effect. But you've probably guessed it. This is a classic case of confusing correlation with causation. The supermarket isn't magically pumping up house prices. What's really happening is that a company like Waitrose is super strategic about where it builds. They put their stores in neighborhoods that are already expensive. So the high property values and the fancy supermarket, they're both caused by the same thing, the affluence of the area. That's the real driver. All right, next up, let's talk about a word we use all the time, average. It seems so straightforward, but honestly, it can be a real master of disguise, hiding what the data actually looks like. Just look at how the story completely changes depending on which average you're looking at. The mean, that's the one we usually think of, gets skewed way up by a few people with really high numbers. But if you look at the median, that's the person smack dab in the middle, the number drops quite a bit. And then the mode, which is just the most common answer, well, for both men and women, it was just 1. So from now on, whenever you hear average, your first question should always be, wait, which average are we talking about? Okay, this next one is going to sound a little weird. Can a dead salmon read minds? Now, I know it sounds like the setup to a bad joke, but it actually points to a really serious problem in research. What happens when you test for so many different things that you're practically guaranteed to find some connection, even if it's in a dead fish? And this is where we get the brilliant and kinda hilarious dead salmon study. It's a perfect illustration of something called p-hacking. Back in 2009, some researchers literally put a dead salmon in a brain scanner. And after running thousands and thousands of tests on its brain activity, they found what looked like a statistically significant result. So what's the takeaway? If you look for enough things, you will eventually find a pattern, just by pure chance. It's kind of like flipping a coin over and over until you get 10 heads in a row, and then running around telling everyone you can magically control coin flips. This leads us right into another one of our brain's favorite little tricks, our need to find a cause for every single effect, even when the real explanation is just things going back to normal. I mean, think about it. Where do cities put up speed cameras? They put them at accident black spots, places that have just had a really unusual spike in accidents, a string of really bad luck, right? But here's the thing. Extreme streaks, good or bad, almost never last. Things tend to drift back to their long-term average. So when the accident rate naturally drops back to normal, we look at the new camera and say, aha, it worked. We give the camera all the credit. That powerful and often invisible effect is called regression to the mean. Okay, so after seeing all the ways we can get fooled, it might be easy to get a little cynical about all this. But there is a better way. Instead of just spotting mistakes after the fact, let's look at a framework for getting to the truth right from the very start. Statisticians and data scientists often use this really powerful roadmap called the PPDAC cycle. What's so great about it is that it forces you to be disciplined. For example, those first 2 steps, problem and plan, they basically stop that p-hacking we saw with the salmon. Why? Because you have to state your question before you start digging around in the data. And that analysis step, it makes you really think about whether the mean or the median is the right tool for the job. It's a whole process designed to guide you from a clear question to a solid conclusion, steering you clear of all those traps we just talked about.
So, how can we put all of this into practice in our everyday lives? Let's boil it all down into a simple toolkit, a checklist of questions you can pull out anytime you're hit with a new statistic.
So keep these questions handy. How do they actually do the study? Are they showing you that big, scary relative risk without mentioning the much more grounded absolute risk? Are they using the right kind of average to tell the story? But maybe the most powerful question on this list is the last one. What am I not being told? Because sometimes the most important part of the story is the part that's been left out completely. Look, the goal here isn't to make you a cynic who distrusts all numbers. It's about approaching them with a healthy dose of curiosity, not fear. Every single statistic out there is telling a story. And now, you've got the tools to ask if it's the whole story or just the ones someone wants you to hear. The real question is, what story are you going to choose to believe?